So as Kata said, the purpose of doing this training, or why Amor has these trainings, is because we send people to go with our clients to ICE check-ins, to immigration court, to criminal court appointments, to visit family members, to go to the hospital, really whatever people need. We want to be able to send somebody along to accompany them. But also, as Kata said, it's useful information, I think, for people to just have, so that, like, if you're in your neighborhood and you think you might see ICE, you sort of know what to do. And obviously, part of the purpose of doing this here is that if ICE were to come here, you all would have both, like, perhaps a slightly clarified understanding of how to spot what ICE might look like, but also just, like, I think for myself, I'm always looking for more strategies of, like, how to best interact with ICE and record ICE and understand, like, what my rights are and what the rights of other people are in a situation. So that's sort of the purpose of this as well. So we're just going to go through this training manual that you have in front of you, not like verbatim, but sort of going through it as it's written out more or less. If you have clarifying questions, feel free to ask them along the way, but I'd say if you have, like, really big picture questions, better to hold them for the end if you can, if they don't feel super burning. But if you feel like you want to understand the material, like, if you don't have your question answered right away, feel free to stop me.
Do you want to share that one, and then Amy and I can share this one, so you're not three on one.
Okay, so this introduction is sort of describing what I just said, which is that basically ICE watchers, which is what we call people who go through this training, basically attend ICE enforcement actions or go with people in anticipation of potential ICE enforcement actions to serve as a neutral witness of ICE activity or sometimes police conduct, and to document ICE conduct. So this can mean having to respond really quickly to, like, if something's happening right outside, or, like, being called ahead of time and knowing that you're going with somebody to court. So there can be a lot of different sorts of situations. So your responsibilities in this role, and this is, again, I think that, like, for people who are doing this training mostly for the purpose of, like, being prepared here at the church, obviously you can take all of this with a grain of salt or understand how it's applicable to what your experience is here. But again, this is sort of a training tailored to a more general audience, and so, like, if things don't resonate with you, then that is A-okay. But distribute know your rights information if you have it, accompany people if that's what you've been assigned to do, and explain to them what your role is. Position yourself so that you are not immediately, like, in the middle of whatever is going on, but that you're close enough to it to observe and listen to what's happening. If there's other people around, coordinate what you're doing with them. Record pretty much anything that ICE is doing. Observe if there's any interaction, like if police is also there, how they're interacting with ICE, particularly in the city of Providence, which, as I'm sure you all know, we have the Community Safety Act, and so really ICE and police should not be interacting, or at least not in a way that suggests that Providence Police is aiding ICE, and so you know, wanting to make sure that that is indeed what is happening if there is an ICE enforcement. Observing really any sorts of interactions that ICE is having with anybody, making sure that if you're part of really what this role is about is recording things on your phone or on any sort of video recording device. And so a lot of the advice here is, like, how to best record and what to look for. So when you're documenting the encounter, you should make sure to have time and date, location, how many people were there, how many ICE officers or other law enforcement were there, what happened, name and badge number of any law enforcement, whether there was a warrant shown to the individual who was detained, if they were detained, name and contact information of anybody else who saw what happened, name and birth date of anybody who was detained or arrested, photographs and videos of anything that happened, name and contact for anyone injured, and this says legal observer, this is from the legal observer training manual, but your own contact information as well. So part of the purpose of this sort of reporting is that for individuals who have immigration concerns, sometimes people can have, if ICE is, I'll back up. ICE often operates outside of its own policies and outside of the regulations that are telling ICE what they can and can't do. And often if people don't know their rights, or even if they do, ICE will act pretty blatantly and often illegally. And so and also, even if they're not illegal, it's often really egregious in the court of public opinion. And so there's a number of purposes to recording ICE conduct. A lot of that is if somebody has an ongoing immigration case and they're detained in a way that where ICE is acting illegally or injures them or has done something that is clearly outside of their own regulations, or walked into a church and detained somebody, then that would be a really useful piece of evidence in that person's case. In addition, there's a number of class action lawsuits, so it's big group lawsuits against ICE that the ACLU and a variety of places has brought or is working on. And generally, having a series of recordings of how ICE operates can be really useful in that sort of situation. Additionally, I personally have found in doing this sort of work for the past couple of years that it's really useful to have recordings of what ICE does for your own information, in terms of if you're with an organization or church or a more, having recordings we can look back on and say, oh, this person is clearly an ICE officer. We know that because we recognize them in these 5 videos, and when we see them, we know that that's ICE. Or ICE, I personally started doing this work in Oregon, which is where I'm from, and they really just always detain people at this one courthouse on Monday mornings between 10 and 12. And so then we knew we should always have people at this one courthouse on Monday mornings between 10 and 12, and now ICE doesn't detain people there anymore, at least not at that time. And so that it's useful in terms of both dissuading ICE from doing those sorts of things, and also for your own ability to really understand how ICE is operating and how you should be operating in response. And finally, sorry, this is a lot of backing up, this sort of recording is really useful if you and the person who you're working with, if in tandem with whoever that is, and if they have a lawyer, etc., have decided that they want to be really public about what happened. So I'm sure that folks here have seen recordings of ICE officers doing things on social media, etc. And so that can be a really useful tool. Sometimes it's obviously an issue of confidentiality and the comfort of impacted people, and also whether in consultation with their lawyer, if they have one, they think that's a good idea for their case, etc. But that is something that can be really useful if that's decided that that's what should be done with footage. So that's just to back up and say what's the point of all this? Why is it useful to record? That said, what you do record, if you record anything, should be treated as confidential attorney work product. So that both means that you shouldn't share it on social media or send it, just text it to your friend or whatever, but also means that if law enforcement asks to see it or asks for your phone, you should say no. And I would say you're within your right to say no, both because they can't take your phone, and also because you can say this is confidential.
Does that apply even if we're not actually attorneys?
Yeah, this manual is adapted from a training manual from the ACLU, and so that this sort of language is crafted for non-attorneys by attorneys. Obviously,
well, that's why I was asking if it applies to
non-attorneys. Yeah, no, it applies to non-attorneys for sure. Great question. If anything does happen in terms of law enforcement taking your phone or forcing you to show them anything you've recorded, this is my phone number here. Oh, we should write up a Moore. I guess a Moore's support line number is on the flyer, so you can call either of those numbers. It's also helpful after something happens to write notes about what happened, or often to just take a second recording of yourself explaining what happened. Because often the video can be really useful, and then it's also really useful to have a narrative of here's what I saw, here's what I remember, etc., something the video didn't catch, or just to supplement whatever sort of recording you've taken. And then this part about transmitting to a Moore is not totally relevant in this case, but if you were, when people do go do court accompaniment for us, it's important that we ultimately get their notes and video, sort of for the purposes described before about what the video is useful for, and we can make sure that the person, like the family of the people impacted, have access to it and stuff like that.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go for
How
it.
do you get your name? Can we ask them their name?
The name of ICE?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can ask them. They are not legally required to tell you.
Right.
Federal law
Just
enforcement
say
officers,
get their
yeah.
name and their badge, but
Try to record. Sometimes their badge will say their name. That is often more applicable to, like, police, city police, though, because city police do have to tell you their name if you ask, but federal
could
law
ask.
enforcement doesn't. It doesn't hurt to ask.
okay.
They probably won't tell you. But often, also, it's helpful to even ICE often is plain clothes, and so they won't even look like law enforcement. But it's really helpful to try to record if you like can see their badge at all, because often they will eventually be like, okay, like present themselves as law enforcement, but sometimes they don't.
Can I ask another question? And
Yeah.
again, this might be more directed towards Kathy or other people from the host committee. But so if God forbid we had to record something here, the idea would be to get the video to you guys, and then you would share it with more or not based on whatever your assessment is. Is that just in terms of the posting role?
Yeah.
Okay.